My name is Sam Spencer. I am the Communications Director with Congresswoman Alma Adams, and I am happy and thank you for having everybody on today. So today we are going to talk about Gun Violence Awareness Day and the critical issues that are facing our country, both over the past decade and in light of recent events in Uvalde, Texas, in Buffalo, New York, and that happen daily in the United States. I want to start today by telling a story I don't speak about too often, but in my personal life, two very good friends of mine almost a decade ago were attacked by another friend of ours. And they were in their home. They were in a place I stayed and visited many times. And one of my friends, Jamie, was stabbed so many times that she never woke up. And my friend Nation was hurt, her husband, and their attacker tried to take his own life. And that's because he had a knife. And I've thought many times in my life what would have happened and how many more people would have been lost in that house if the attacker had had a gun. And it's something I think about a lot, and something that, tells me personally that we really need to have the capacity for change in this country, and we have to get something done. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce my boss and a champion for the people of North Carolina's 12th Congressional District, Congresswoman Alma Adams.
Thank you, Sam, and thank you for sharing that story. Violence truly tears our souls asunder. But before I get started, I want to thank all of you for attending, and I would like to thank our guests today, Mecklenburg County District Attorney Spencer Merriweather and Grace McLain, a volunteer leader with Moms Demand Action. We're here today because inaction is no longer an option. The murder of any child should be a reason for action. The murder of 19 children, fourth graders and third graders at Robb Elementary, with a limitless future ahead of them, should be a catalyst for immediate change. And the terrible fact that this is only the third worst school shooting of the past 16 years. That, my friends, should shake us to our souls. I was an educator for 40 years, and I never felt the fear and apprehension that our teachers feel today, especially after losing two more of our fellow educators last week. I can't imagine how teachers and students balance those concerns with every other challenge they face. And as a mother and grandmother, I am so concerned as a mother with a daughter who is a elementary school principal. And with the attack at UNC Charlotte 3 years ago, as well as the shooting at an HBCU campus this week, we know how close to home school shootings are. We've reached a point in our country where people have legitimate concerns about making it home at the end of the day. And it's not only teachers. The racially motivated attack at a Buffalo supermarket earlier last month is only the most recent in a long list of hate crimes involving a gun, specifically a legally obtained AR-15 style rifle. Mass shootings are such a common occurrence that they have defined the United States. In the last 2 weeks, 31 people have been murdered and another 20 injured at the hands of two 18-year-olds legally armed with semi-automatic assault rifles. These latest attacks primarily targeted the most vulnerable of our communities, the young and the elderly. Mass shootings, however, are a small percentage of the gun deaths in our country. Gun violence takes more than 30 lives and wounds hundreds more in the United States every single day. I'll let our district attorney address this in greater detail, but during the pandemic years of 2020 and 2021, there was a total of 210 homicides in Charlotte. The vast majority involved a firearm. Each of these acts causes a new tear in the tapestry of our community. Many holy books tell us that that whoever destroys a single life is considered by Scripture to have destroyed the whole world, and whoever saves a single life is considered by Scripture to have saved the whole world. Each time we lose someone here in Charlotte, we lose an entire world, an entire universe of hopes and dreams and aspirations. We lose a thread that binds together families and communities. Well, as a Charlotte community, as a nation, we must do something to stop the gun violence that tears at the fabric of our communities. My colleagues and I have led the efforts to introduce key pieces of legislation that would close the loophole in our background check system, extend the background check process, prohibit those convicted of hate crimes from purchasing firearms, and reinstate the federal ban on assault weapons. Every term since joining Congress, I've been an original co-sponsor of the assault weapons ban, and I've supported common sense background checks and other legislation that is broadly supported by the American people, but opposed by many representatives and senators who would rather listen to the National Rifle Association than their constituents. Over my last 2 terms in Congress, I've co-sponsored 19 critical pieces of legislation to stop gun violence in America, including H.R. 7910, the Protecting Our Kids Act, which I hope to vote for and send to the Senate when we return to Washington next week. And here's why we must act. Today, more people are carrying guns in America than ever. That includes legal and many illegal guns and guns that are legally carried. There are nearly 400 million firearms circulating in America, more guns than people, and gun violence is responsible for more than 32,000 deaths every year. This epidemic disproportionately arms communities of color and poor communities. With so many guns on the street, Congress must pass common sense strategies to effectively reduce gun violence across the country by promoting safe storage of firearms, addressing do-it-yourself ghost guns and bump stocks, strengthening gun laws that allow guns to be trafficked from state to state, and taking semi-automatic weapons of war off the streets and off the shelves of gun stores and gun shows. 6 years ago, I joined my friend John Lewis at a congressional sit-in on the floor of the U.S. House of Representatives. And while I will do everything I can with my pen and my vote to end the gun crisis, I'm not afraid to put my body on the line as well. Because too many of our families, friends and neighbors and children have put their body on the line for our 400 million guns. I urge my friends in the Senate to join me in voting for freedom, freedom to go to school without fear, freedom from active shooter drills, freedom from the anxiety of being in a public space, freedom from worrying about our loved ones and our little ones, freedom from a violent death, freedom from weapons of war. I want to thank you, and with that, it is my honor to turn it over now to our District Attorney, Spencer Merriweather. Spencer?
Congresswoman Adams, thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you so much for your leadership on this issue. In listening to your comments, I'm drawn back to literally 1999 when I was a junior in college, and it was at that point that I first heard about the shooting at Columbine. And I would have thought that so many years later, we would not still be dealing with this. And more importantly, that we would not be dealing with it in the expanded way that we are. In fact, 20 years removed from that day when I was a college junior, I found myself on the campus of UNCC, which was without question the most harrowing day of my time as a prosecutor, and certainly my time as an elected district attorney, where I arrived at the scene of a crime, a horrible, horrible crime, where 6 lives were significantly impacted. 2 of those lives were taken away from us. And I know that it's because of gun violence. And once you have experienced, and once you have been at the within reach of a mass shooting, it will impact you for the rest of your life in the way that you see this issue that we're speaking about today as far as gun violence is concerned. And in speaking with colleagues and friends and family, it is amazing how the degrees of separation are becoming narrower and narrower as far as our proximity to mass shootings. They have become so much more common. And that means that we are well overdue for a time to act. We've been talking long enough, and it is just amazing, that we keep hearing about rights and freedoms. And I think Congresswoman was exactly right to frame it in terms of freedom from fear. We are all entitled to that. I believe in the right to bear arms, but I also believe that with rights come responsibilities. And the legislation that I know that Congresswoman Adams has advanced is really about exercising those responsibilities and adhering to those responsibilities, like safe storage, like a background check to make sure that we know who it is who is carrying these weapons in our community. Making sure, for instance, that these guns, Lord knows that these guns do not get into the hands of children. Now, I'm not alone among prosecutors across the country who have personally witnessed a spike in juvenile violence. And at the heart of that violence is not, we are seeing that guns are right at the center of it. And we are seeing that more and more access to guns by our children is something that is really bringing a great pause to our society. So when we think about this proliferation of weapons in our community, we shouldn't just think of it in terms of an individual person's rights, but think about it in the hands of a kid. And think about what that gun can do to your kid. And think about what someone else's kid can do with that weapon in their hands. Again, what I ask, and I think that what days like Buffalo and days like, what happened in Texas and all of the days before make us think about how precious our families are, how precious our communities are, but really how precious our children are. If we can keep that at the center of this conversation, then it is my hope and certainly my prayer that we, 20 years from now, we will not have to look and say, why are we still dealing with this issue? There is someone and a group of people who've been showing great leadership in our community on the issue of gun violence and trying to prevent it. Grace McLain is with us today, and she is a wonderful community leader. And she has asked, we're fortunate to have her with us today as representing Moms Demand Action. And Grace, at this point, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, DA Merriweather. Thank you for including me, Representative Adams, and for your ongoing work on this issue. I'm also a constituent and I appreciate your leadership. Good morning, everyone. My name is Grace McLain. I'm a volunteer leader for Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America, which is part of Everytown for Gun Safety. And my family has also been affected by gun violence. My niece Amber was shot and killed by an ex-boyfriend in 2008 at age 22. I also have a friend that was shot and killed in a domestic violence murder-suicide 3 years ago. She left her mother and sister and 2 daughters. I know far too many people who have lost sons and brothers. I know what this loss of life does to families and how it hurts everyone around them. We have entire communities hurting now. Families are in distress and pleading for help. Survivors of gun violence can't just walk away, and we're asking the Senate to not look away now, but to take action now. In the wake of mass shootings and gun violence that ravages communities every day, this year we wear orange to tell our lawmakers, especially those in the US Senate, don't look away from our country's gun violence crisis. It's time for you to do your jobs. The world is watching what's happening in the aftermath of the tragic shootings in Buffalo and Uvalde and too many others. And we cannot look away from the pain and heartbreak and the fear we are all feeling now. Every day, more than 110 Americans are killed with guns, and that number does include suicide. And more than 200 others, though, are shot and wounded. We wear orange to call for an end to gun violence in all its forms, including domestic violence, suicide, and city gun violence. How can we continue to allow firearms to be the leading cause of death for children and teens? It's outrageous. The Senate has failed to do its job and ignored the lives that have been taken by gun violence over and over again. This year, we wear orange to call on our lawmakers to not look away and actually take real, meaningful action that will save lives. Right now, the Senate is considering several important gun safety priorities that can help end our country's gun violence crisis, including background checks on all gun sales and red flag laws to temporarily remove guns when a person is in crisis or they're threatening to harm themselves or others. We will raise our voices during Wear Orange Weekend to call on Congress to do their jobs and take action to save lives. We're asking followers to text the word BOLD, B-O-L-D, to 64433 to tell your senators to take action on gun safety. Thank you, everyone. I love the people of North Carolina and our country. We deserve better and we demand better. Thanks again.
Thank you so much, Grace. And for members of the media, we're going to take a couple questions really quick. So if you have a question, please use the raise your hand function. I have already promoted a couple folks to the panelist level. So I will give it to Kylie Marsh first.
Hi, thank you so much, all of you, for being here and taking the time to promote the common sense gun violence laws that are so important to our community. I was wondering what we can do to talk about mental health. I know that especially in North Carolina, so many of our deaths are due to suicide and purposeful self-inflicted injury. Is there, you know, what can be said about that?
Well, is that for any particular person? Well, let me just say, it is an issue. It's always been an issue, and we are, in my opinion, needing to place more emphasis and resources in this area. It is in some ways, as we've seen in recent shootings, it is in some ways connected, but I do think that we're going to have to address this issue on multiple fronts. And so that is something that we're talking about in the Congress. But right now, for this week, we're looking at trying to get at least a bill passed that would do some basic things in terms of who has access and trying to really control that, and in terms of looking at backgrounds and so forth.
And it's always smart for me to defer to the person who writes legislation. And I think that Congresswoman Adams is exactly right as far as the strategy right now is restricting who has access to these weapons. Mental health is certainly a part of this conversation. Many of the people that, you know, when we hear about these mass shootings, but quite frankly, even much of the neighborhood violence that we hear so much about, you know, there's a lot more going on there than just, you know, mental healthfulness, so to speak. But that can't, you know, we have to understand, and I believe that, you know, Mr. Spencer, you know, started us off just telling us what the difference is when someone has access to a gun, a firearm, as opposed to another type of weapon, and how that changes the equation for all of us and changes the level of impact for our entire community. So yes, mental health needs to be a part of the conversation, but please don't divorce that from the dangerousness of the firearms that have found their way into our community.
Exactly. It's the access to the guns, and the extreme risk protection order, or red flag laws is what most people know, but it's an extreme risk protection order for a family or law enforcement to appeal to a judge to temporarily take guns away when somebody's in distress. That is usually used to prevent suicide, because suicide is often very not spontaneous, that people just decide to do it. If they have that access to the gun, then it's a very lethal means, more so than others, and ages are getting younger and younger. You know, suicide, I think, is actually through COVID has been, maybe even went down a little bit, but it was already high. 58% of gun deaths are by suicide. There was another point I wanted to make about that. We also talk about, we have people in every town. We have a veterans advisory committee, and there are a lot of veterans, and they're talking about other means to promote the idea among veterans of having your wingman take your gun, you know, that not having your gun all the time, storing it at a range, or if you know you're in distress, giving it to a trusted friend, and that way it's not in your home. But again, the red flag laws is normally in the states that have them, and off the top of my head, maybe 19 states in DC have red flag laws. They're really successful in preventing suicide, but we would like to see a federal law, not all states.
Thank you all. So we're going to go to Spectrum News and then WCCB if they have a question, and we'll close out with Marina Boyle.
Good morning. My name is Molly Hurley. I work for Spectrum News, and this question is, I know that it was mentioned that there's a heightened amount of juvenile crime in many cities, not only just Charlotte. So, you know, when we talk about, you know, storing your guns away, you know, obviously accidental shootings, you know, we hear it on the news far too often than we should. But for the kids that are just resorting to violence and utilizing guns, and find, you know, whether they're getting it from their home or out on the streets because they're involved with the wrong types of people, is there a bigger issue with the parenting? I mean, where does that kind of trickle down to, or why are kids resorting to this violence in the first place?
I certainly have a response to this, but I want to start with the one that Grace just put in the chat. So Grace, if you could talk a little bit about just the issue that we're having with guns being stolen. I think that's important to come from you, and I'll follow up with you.
I mean, we hear over and over from law enforcement, it's not just in Charlotte, but guns stolen from cars is a big issue. And even in like school shootings, mass shootings, the gun is usually brought from the home of the shooter or a neighbor, you know, a neighbor or close family. I mean, often they're not old enough to get the gun. And then I'll just make a general statement that there are so many guns now because, you know, the NRA, which is the lobby for the gun manufacturers, and the gun manufacturers want to sell guns. And so there's this idea that it's guns everywhere. They resist any law that would restrict who and where we can carry. So there's guns everywhere. Well, a lot of those guns, you know, are going to end up, we see increased trafficking and guns on the street. And the kids are getting the guns. You know, we have to push back on that guns everywhere, that anybody can have one and everywhere. Right.
So I'll follow with that and just say that, you know, I think that certainly, you know, I'm a parent. Parents have to be vigilant. We all have to be vigilant. The community has to be vigilant in making sure that we are limiting access of guns to young people. But quite frankly, the more guns that are out, it's a matter of economics more than it is parenting. Because the more guns that are actually out there in the market, stolen guns become cheap. And so if a 14-year-old, a 15-year-old, a 16-year-old can go out and get a gun for $25, because there's so many of them out there, that's a problem for all of us. All of our children are at risk when that is the circumstance. That comes from the proliferation of firearms in our community. Most of those guns are stolen and illegal, and that has to come to an end.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Next, we'll go to WCCB and we'll conclude with Marina Boyle. All right. In that case, we will conclude with Maureen. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you all so much for taking my question. This is a follow-up really for you, DA Merriweather. We're talking about all of these guns that are stolen. CNPD has talked about how many guns are taken out of cars because they are not properly stored. Can you answer this? Are you at a place where now people who do not store their guns properly should face criminal charges? Because some of those guns that are stolen are used in violent crimes. What can we do to hold those gun owners accountable to the point where they could actually face charges? Is that a possibility?
I think that education is certainly a part of it. And is Maureen, thank you for, first of all, and thank you for your career of service to this community and educating the general public about so many different issues, but specifically this one. When you think about, people don't necessarily understand that, when they store their weapon in an unsafe way, just what some of the awful ramifications that can come from not only having their gun stolen, but what happens next. People aren't thinking about what happens next. And so we've got to do even more education. I can also tell you, and this has been something that I know members of the General Assembly or of our local General Assembly delegation have looked at and thinking about ways in which either through the law we can encourage or potentially through enforcement, try to make people take gun storage more seriously. Those laws aren't necessarily all that fruitful right now in the way that they're currently constructed at our state level. But again, I know that members of our General Assembly are looking at a balanced and thoughtful way of making sure that that value has a place in our law, and whatever support I can give them, I certainly plan to do that.
I want to just jump in here a moment and looking at some of the conversations in the chat, because I too and members of Congress are very concerned about the ages, the fact that we've had situations where basically children, 18 years of age, being able to purchase a weapon. That to me is unconscionable. I don't believe that an 18-year-old should be able to purchase a weapon. We've got to raise that age. That's one thing I hope that Congress will look at seriously to do. And also not sell semi-automatic weapons to anybody. I mean, I just don't think those are things that we need to have on our streets. Those are weapons of war. But I think the real problem, one of the problems, one of many, is that we don't have a uniform policy, a federal policy across the nation. Because if you are 18 and you can go to Nevada, I'll just pick that out, a state and purchase a gun or a weapon, even a semi-automatic weapon, and then you can take that to another state. And I know I've heard many of my colleagues talk about states' rights, and having been a former state legislator, I support states' rights. But I think we have a right to protect everyone across whatever state. And so I'm hoping that whatever we do, that in terms of putting some laws and regulations in place, that we will look at the impact down the road. So if we do it, if we allow one state to do it and another state can't, and so forth, then the problem persists, and we still have these crimes going from state to state. So I just wanted to add that.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for your questions today. Just to follow up on the chat, Grace said earlier that for their organization, text BOLD to 64433. And then I will be happy to give Congresswoman, if you want the final word. Otherwise, we can conclude today.
Well, my final word is just thank you to our participants today. Thank you to the press and all the other individuals who logged in to at least be a part of the conversation. And I would certainly encourage you, everyone out there, to reach out to members of Congress, the House and the Senate, about how strongly you feel about our taking the necessary action to make sure that we keep our communities safe from all of the gun violence. And particularly as we've seen most recently with the murders of children trying to go to school to learn, and you sending your kids off to school and they don't come home. So we need everyone in the community to reach out and to speak out and to stand up on this issue. So I just want to just say that and thank you for the input today.